The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on Samuel Garrett's shoulders as his horse picked its way through the rocky terrain 15 miles south of Fort Stockton. Sam had been riding supply routes for the Carson Ranch for 3 years now, a solitary job that suited a man who preferred the company of silence over the noise of town gossip. The landscape stretched endlessly before him, all burnt orange earth and scattered mesquite, beautiful in its own harsh way. He was thinking about nothing in particular, just the steady rhythm of hooves and the weight of flour sacks behind his saddle when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it, something between a groan and a whisper, carried on the hot wind. Sam reined in his horse and listened. There it was again. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle, not out of aggression, but pure frontier caution. In this country, unexpected sounds usually meant trouble of one kind or another. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the dry ground, and followed the sound around a cluster of large boulders that cast thin shadows in the afternoon light. What he found made his stomach turn. A young man, barely more than a boy really, was tied to a wooden stake driven into the hard earth. His skin was burned raw from exposure, his lips cracked and bleeding. The rope bindings had cut deep into his wrists. From his clothing, and the way his long dark hair was tied back, Sam immediately recognized him as Apache. Sam's mind raced through the implications faster than his heart could keep up. This wasn't random. Someone had left this young warrior here deliberately, probably bounty hunters, heading to Fort Stockton to collect money for capturing what the territorial government called hostile natives. They'd left him to die slowly rather than waste a bullet, knowing they'd still get paid for reporting the capture. It was legal, technically. The Apache had been at war with settlers for decades, and plenty of people would say this warrior probably deserved whatever fate found him. Sam had heard all the arguments in saloons and general stores, the stories of raids and conflicts that made good people see others as less than human. But standing there in the heat, looking at another person suffering, all those arguments felt hollow. This wasn't war, this wasn't defense. This was just cruelty dressed up in paperwork and bounty notices. Sam knew what he was supposed to do. Ride on, report the location in town, let the authorities handle it. That was the safe choice, the one that wouldn't cost him everything he'd built. The Carson Ranch was one of the few places that hired men without asking too many questions about their past, and Sam needed that job. He had no family, no savings to speak of, just his horse and his reputation as a reliable worker. Freeing an Apache captive would mark him as a traitor to his own people. The bounty hunters would come after him. He'd never work in West Texas again. He might very well hang for it. The young warrior's eyes opened slightly, unfocused and glazed with dehydration. They locked onto Sam's face for just a moment, and in that instant Sam saw no enemy. He saw a human being in agony, someone's son, maybe someone's brother. He saw himself reflected back, alone and at the mercy of a world that didn't care much for people who fell outside its lines. Sam made his decision before his mind could talk him out of it. He pulled his knife from his belt and stepped forward, cutting through the ropes with quick, deliberate movements. The young man collapsed forward and Sam caught him, easing him to the ground, water first. Sam retrieved his canteen and carefully dripped water onto the cracked lips, not too much at once. The warrior coughed, choked, then drank more steadily. Sam tore a piece of cloth from his own shirt and wet it, pressing it gently to the burned skin. He worked in silence, his hands steady even as his thoughts spun. What had he just done? This wasn't some small thing. This was the kind of choice that divided a man's life into before and after. He glanced toward the horizon, half expecting to see riders coming back to check their captive. How much time did he have before someone noticed? The young Apache slowly regained some awareness, his eyes clearing enough to register confusion. Why was this white cowboy helping him? The question hung unspoken in the air between them. Sam didn't have an answer that would make sense in words. He just knew that riding past would have haunted him for the rest of his days. He'd seen too much senseless suffering already in his 32 years. Sometimes a man had to draw a line, even if drawing it meant stepping off a cliff. He helped the warrior sit up against a boulder, gave him more water, and shared some of the dried beef from his saddlebag. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. One man had chosen mercy over safety, and the other knew it. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and red, Sam faced his new reality. By tomorrow, people would know what he'd done. The bounty hunters would discover their captive gone, and they'd track the signs. Sam wasn't fool enough to think he could hide this. His only question now was what came next. He couldn't go back to the ranch, couldn't return to Fort Stockton, couldn't slip back into his old life pretending this never happened. He'd saved one life and thrown away his own in the process. The young warrior met his eyes again, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just the recognition that both their fates had shifted in a single afternoon. Sam stood, offering his hand to help the Apache to his feet. They had to move. Night was coming, and with it, the reckoning he'd chosen for himself. He wasn't alone anymore, but he'd never felt more uncertain about what tomorrow would bring. Dawn broke over the Texas plains in streaks of pale gold and soft pink, beautiful and indifferent to the troubles of men below. Sam had barely slept, dozing fitfully against a rock face while keeping watch over the small camp he'd made in a hidden canyon 5 miles from where he'd found the Apache warrior. His mind kept running through scenarios, each worse than the last. By now, someone would have discovered the empty stake. By noon, they'd know which direction he'd gone. By evening, they'd be hunting him in earnest. He'd helped the young man onto his horse at dusk, and they'd ridden slowly through the darkness, the warrior still weak but growing steadier with water and rest. As the first light touched the canyon walls, Sam watched his unexpected companion wake. The young man sat up carefully, testing his strength, running his fingers over the rope burns on his wrists. He looked to be about 20 years old, with the lean, weathered build of someone who'd grown up in harsh country. His eyes, now clear and alert, studied Sam with an intensity that made the cowboy self-conscious. They'd spent hours together without exchanging a single word. Sam didn't speak Apache, and he doubted this warrior spoke much English, but communication sometimes happened in the spaces between words, in gestures and expressions, and the simple act of sharing food. Sam pulled out the last of his provisions, hardtack and dried meat, and split it evenly between them. The warrior accepted his share with a slight nod, something that might have been gratitude or just acknowledgement. They ate in silence as the canyon filled with morning light. Sam's horse grazed on the sparse grass nearby, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out. It felt surreal, this quiet moment of peace when Sam knew chaos was likely riding toward them. He'd crossed a line yesterday, the kind of line that communities didn't forgive. In the eyes of Fort Stockton, and everyone who lived there, he was now something worse than a criminal. He was a betrayer of his own kind. The warrior suddenly spoke, his voice rough from disuse but firm. One word in English that Sam understood immediately. Why? It was the question Sam had been asking himself all night. Why throw away everything for a stranger? Why risk hanging for someone the law considered an enemy? Sam met those dark eyes and searched for words that would make sense. Finally, he said simply, "Couldn't leave you there." It wasn't eloquent, but it was true. The warrior considered this, then nodded slowly. He pointed to himself and said, "Dakota." A name. An offering of identity. Sam responded in kind, tapping his own chest. Samuel. Sam. They sat with those names between them for a moment, two men from different worlds who'd been thrown together by one impulsive act of conscience. Dakota stood, testing his legs, and walked to the edge of the canyon to look out at the landscape beyond. Sam watched him, wondering if the young Apache would simply leave now, disappear into the wild country he knew far better than any white settler. It would make sense. Dakota owed him nothing beyond the debt of his life, and staying together only increased the danger for both of them. Sam half expected to see him scale the canyon wall and vanish, becoming just a memory of the day everything changed. But Dakota didn't leave. Instead, he turned back to Sam and made a gesture, pointing to Sam and then to himself, then sweeping his hand toward the horizon. Together. Sam understood immediately and felt something tighten in his chest. The warrior wasn't abandoning him. Despite having every reason to flee alone, Dakota was choosing to stay. Maybe it was honor. Maybe it was recognition that two hunted men stood a better chance than one. Maybe it was something else entirely, some understanding that had formed in the crucible of yesterday's choice. Whatever the reason, Sam wasn't alone. The realization hit him with unexpected force. He'd been alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone choose to stand beside him. They prepared to move, covering signs of their camp and planning their route. Dakota's knowledge of the terrain quickly became apparent. He pointed toward a series of ridges to the northwest, then traced a path with his finger that avoided the main trails. He knew where water could be found, where the land provided natural concealment. Sam realized with growing clarity that his act of mercy had brought him an unexpected guide through country that would have been nearly impossible to navigate alone. They set out together as the sun climbed higher, Sam leading his horse while Dakota walked ahead, moving with a confidence that suggested he was rapidly regaining his strength. Around midday, they heard it. The distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders moving fast. Sam and Dakota froze simultaneously, then moved as one toward a cluster of boulders. They crouched low, Sam's hand on his rifle, both barely breathing as the sound grew closer, then gradually faded eastward. The search party was out, casting wide for signs. Sam's heart hammered in his chest. This was real now, undeniably real. Men were hunting him with the full backing of territorial law. If caught, he'd face a rope for certain. They waited until the sound disappeared completely, before moving again, this time with even greater caution. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they reached a small spring hidden among rocks, exactly where Dakota had indicated it would be. While they refilled the canteen, Sam finally allowed himself to think beyond immediate survival. What was his plan? Where could they possibly go? He had no answers, just the growing certainty that yesterday's choice had irrevocably changed his path. He looked at Dakota, who was scanning the horizon with experienced eyes, and felt a strange sense of rightness despite the danger. He'd done something that mattered. He'd chosen humanity over expedience. Whatever came next, he'd face it with that knowledge, and he wouldn't face it alone. Dakota met his eyes and gave the slightest nod, as if reading his thoughts. They moved on together into the coming evening, two unlikely companions bound by one cowboy's refusal to look away from suffering. 3 days into their flight through the backcountry, Sam and Dakota had developed a rhythm of survival that required few words. They moved primarily at dawn and dusk, resting during the brightest hours when pursuers could spot them from distance. Dakota's knowledge of the land proved invaluable again and again. He found water sources that Sam would have missed entirely, identified plants that could be eaten when their provisions ran low, and chose paths that left minimal trace. Sam contributed his own skills, his rifle bringing down a jackrabbit that they roasted over a carefully hidden fire, and his understanding of how possess operated kept them one step ahead of the search patterns. The silence between them had transformed from awkward to comfortable. They communicated through gestures, expressions, and the kind of intuitive understanding that develops when two people depend on each other completely. Dakota would point to a rock formation, and Sam would understand they'd shelter there. Sam would touch his ear and gesture backward, and Dakota would immediately know riders were approaching from behind. It was efficient, this wordless partnership, but Sam found himself curious about the man he'd saved. Who was Dakota before the bounty hunters caught him? What was his story? Where was his family? On the third evening, as they sat on a ridge watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors, Dakota began to speak. His English was limited but clearer than Sam had initially thought, each word carefully chosen. He told Sam about his family, about a younger sister who made him laugh and an uncle who taught him to track. He spoke about his mother, her hands always busy with work, her songs filling their camp. His father had died 2 winters ago, and Dakota had been trying to provide for his family when the bounty hunters ambushed him near a water source. He'd been heading home with supplies, never saw them coming. They'd celebrated their capture, talking about the reward money while he lay bound and unable to move. Sam listened, watching the young man's face as he spoke. There was pain there, but also strength and dignity. Dakota wasn't asking for pity or even understanding. He was simply sharing his truth, offering pieces of himself to the man who'd saved him. When Dakota finished, he looked at Sam expectantly, and Sam realized it was his turn. He spoke about his own past, keeping it simple. His parents had died of fever when he was 16. He'd drifted west working various jobs, never quite finding a place that felt like home. The Carson Ranch had been decent work, but even there he'd been just a hired hand, someone passing through. He'd never married, never had children, never put down roots deep enough to matter. As Sam talked, he realized how empty his life had been. Not bad, necessarily, but hollow. He'd been surviving rather than living, moving through days without purpose beyond the next meal, the next job. Saving Dakota had been the first time in years he'd felt truly alive, truly himself. It had cost him everything in practical terms, but it had given him something he hadn't known he needed. A reason to matter, a moment when his choice made a difference. Dakota seemed to understand this without Sam having to explain it. He nodded slowly and said something in Apache, then translated haltingly. Some paths, we don't choose. They choose us. The next morning brought new challenges. They'd been traveling roughly northwest, away from Fort Stockton and the main settlements, but they couldn't run forever. Sam's horse was tiring. Their food was nearly gone and winter would arrive in a few months. They needed a plan beyond simple flight. As they walked, Sam found himself wondering aloud, more to himself than to Dakota, about what came next. Could he ever return to any kind of normal life? Was there anywhere in Texas he'd be safe? Dakota listened, then offered an unexpected suggestion. He spoke about a trading post he knew of, far to the north near the border of New Mexico territory, run by a man who didn't ask questions and didn't care about territorial disputes. Sam considered this. A trading post meant other people, which meant risk, but it also meant supplies, information, maybe even work. They couldn't survive indefinitely on what they could hunt and forage. More importantly, Dakota needed to find a way back to his family, and Sam needed to figure out what his life looked like now that his old one was forfeit. The trading post could be a waypoint, a place to catch their breath and plan more carefully. It was risky, but staying in the open was riskier. Sam agreed, and they adjusted their course, angling more directly north toward the distant promise of relative safety. That afternoon, they had their closest call yet. Rounding a bend in a dry wash, they nearly walked straight into a pair of cowboys watering their horses. For a frozen second, everyone stared at each other. Sam's hand moved toward his rifle, but before violence could erupt, Dakota stepped forward with his hands visible and empty. He spoke calmly to Sam without looking away from the cowboys. "Don't shoot. They're not hunters." Sam held his position tense while the two cowboys assessed the situation. They were young, probably ranch hands on some errand. One of them, a kid who couldn't have been more than 18, finally spoke. "We don't want trouble." "Didn't see nothing." His companion nodded vigorously. Sam understood immediately. These weren't lawmen or bounty hunters. They were just working cowboys who wanted no part of whatever situation they'd stumbled into. Sam slowly raised his hands as well, showing he meant no harm. "We're just passing through," he said quietly. The cowboys nodded again and mounted their horses quickly, riding off without looking back. As soon as they disappeared, Sam let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That could have gone terribly wrong, but something interesting had happened. The young cowboys had chosen to see nothing, to let them pass. Maybe Sam and Dakota weren't the only ones who didn't always follow the rules they were supposed to. They moved on more cautiously, but the encounter left Sam thinking. Not everyone would hunt them. Not everyone saw the world in simple terms of us and them. There were other people like him, people who questioned the harsh judgments of frontier justice, who saw gray where others insisted on black and white. It was a small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. That night, as they made camp in a sheltered ravine, Dakota shared some of the wild onions he'd found, and they ate a meager but satisfying meal. Sam looked across the fire at his companion and felt genuine gratitude. Whatever happened next, these days on the run had taught him something about trust, about friendship that formed not from similarity but from shared struggle and mutual respect. Dakota caught his look and smiled slightly, the first real smile Sam had seen from him. "Good partnership," he said in his careful English. Sam nodded, returning the smile. "Good partnership," he agreed. They were still being hunted, still fugitives from a justice system that wouldn't understand or forgive what Sam had done, but they were facing it together, and somehow that made all the difference. Air stars emerged in the darkening sky above the Texas wilderness. Two unlikely friends sat in comfortable silence, each knowing the other would be there when morning came. After 8 days of hard travel, Sam and Dakota finally spotted the trading post, nestled in a rocky valley where Texas began to give way to New Mexico territory. It was a rough structure built of adobe and weathered wood, with a corral holding a few horses and a wisp of smoke rising from a chimney. The American flag hung from a pole out front, faded and frayed by constant wind. This was the edge of civilization, a place where territorial law grew thin and personal survival mattered more than official authority. Sam felt both relief and apprehension as they approached. Relief that they'd made it this far without capture. Apprehension, because any encounter with other people carried risk. They'd discussed strategy the night before, using their growing vocabulary of shared words and gestures. Dakota would stay hidden in the rocks, while Sam went inside first to assess the situation. If it seemed safe, Sam would signal and Dakota would join him. If trouble emerged, Dakota would disappear into the wilderness, and they'd meet at a predetermined location 3 miles north. It wasn't a perfect plan, but caution had kept them alive this long. Sam approached slowly on foot, leading his weary horse, presenting himself as a tired traveler rather than a fugitive. His beard had grown in during their journey, and dust covered his clothes. He looked like what he was, a man who'd been surviving in rough country. The trading post door swung open before Sam could knock, and a weathered man in his 50s stepped out. He had the look of someone who'd seen everything, and been surprised by little of it. His eyes took in Sam's condition with a practiced glance, noting the worn clothes, the rifle, the nervous way Sam scanned the surroundings. "Name's McCready," the man said simply. "Are you lost or hiding?" The directness caught Sam off guard. He'd prepared various stories, but something about McCready's expression suggested lies would be wasted effort. "Bit of both," Sam admitted carefully. McCready nodded as if this answered everything. "Come inside." Got coffee that's almost drinkable. The interior of the trading post was cluttered but organized. Shelves stocked with supplies, furs hanging from ceiling beams, a pot-belly stove radiating welcome heat. McCready poured coffee from a battered pot and gestured for Sam to sit. They sized each other up in silence for a moment. Finally, McCready spoke. "I get men passing through here pretty regular. Some running towards something, some running away. Don't much care which as long as they don't bring trouble to my door. What are you running from?" Sam considered how much to reveal. Something about McCready invited honesty, but trust was still a luxury he couldn't quite afford. "Made a choice some people didn't like," he said carefully. McCready's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "That covers about everything worth doing." "The law after you?" Sam nodded. "Territorial law. Bounty hunters, maybe." McCready sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "What did you do?" "Steal. Kill someone." Sam met his eyes. "Freed someone who was left to die. Someone they considered an enemy." Understanding dawned on McCready's face. "Apache." Sam nodded again. McCready let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. "Well, that would do it. That'd get you hunted proper." "Where is he now?" Sam hesitated. McCready waved a hand. "Got him hiding in the rocks watching this place, I'd wager. Smart." The old trader stood and walked to the door, opening it and calling out into the empty-looking landscape. "If there's an Apache out there who helped keep this cowboy alive for the past week, might as well come in and get warm." "No tricks here." Sam tensed, unsure whether he'd made a terrible mistake. But after a long moment, Dakota emerged from behind a boulder, where Sam hadn't even known he was positioned. The young warrior approached cautiously, his eyes never leaving McCready. When he stepped inside, McCready looked him over with the same assessing gaze he'd given Sam. "You're young. Fair you got family worried sick about you." Dakota nodded once. McCready poured another cup of coffee and handed it to Dakota, who accepted it with visible surprise. The 3 men sat in an unlikely circle, steam rising from their cups. McCready spoke directly to Dakota now. "I've known Apache folk for 30 years. Traded with them, argued with them, respected them. What happened to you wasn't right, and what this man did to help you took guts. But you both got problems now. Can't go back to your people with every lawman between here and Fort Stockton watching for you." He turned to Sam. "And you can't show your face in any town from here to El Paso. So what's your plan?" It was the question Sam had been avoiding thinking about too directly. He had no plan beyond survival. Dakota spoke up, his English improving with each conversation. "Need to reach family. Tell them I live, then—" He trailed off, uncertain. McCready nodded, understanding. "And you?" he asked Sam. Sam shrugged helplessly. "Keep moving, I guess. Find work somewhere people don't know my name. Start over if I can." The words felt hollow even as he said them. Starting over meant being alone again, drifting through life without purpose. He'd gotten used to having Dakota beside him, used to the partnership they'd formed. The thought of going separate ways sat heavy in his chest. McCready studied them both for a long moment, then stood and walked to a desk cluttered with papers. He pulled out a map and spread it on the table. "I got a proposition for you. Not charity, mind you. Actual work if you want it." Sam and Dakota leaned forward as McCready pointed to a spot on the map north of their current location. "Got a supply line I run from here to a couple remote camps in New Mexico. Mining camps mostly, and one ranch that's too far from anywhere for regular service. It's hard work. Requires knowing the country, dealing with difficult terrain, and keeping your mouth shut about who you see and what they might be running from." He looked at both of them significantly. "I need reliable men who can handle themselves, don't mind being out in rough country for weeks at a time, and won't ask questions about the customers. Pay is fair, includes supplies, and most importantly, nobody up that way cares much about territorial disputes or bounty notices. You'd be too far out and too useful to bother with." Sam felt hope stir for the first time in days. Actual work. Honest work. Even if it was on the edges of legal society. A way to survive that didn't involve constantly running. He looked at Dakota. "What do you think?" Dakota considered carefully. "Can I see family? Tell them safe." McCready nodded. "The route passes within 20 miles of Apache territory. I've got an understanding with some of the bands out there. Not friendship exactly, but respect. I can get word to your family that you're alive and working. Maybe arrange a meeting in a few months when things cool down." Dakota's face showed relief so profound that Sam felt it echo in his own chest. The young man could reconnect with his family, let them know he hadn't died in the desert. That mattered more than anything. Sam extended his hand to McCready. "We'll take the work. And thank you." McCready shook his hand firmly, then Dakota's. "Don't thank me yet. It's hard living out there and you'll earn every penny. But you'll be alive and free, which beats hanging or starving." He walked to the shelves and began pulling down supplies. "Rest here tonight. Tomorrow I'll show you the routes and introduce you to the work. You two saved each other out there in the desert. That's the kind of partnership that can survive just about anything the frontier throws at it." That night, Sam and Dakota slept in the relative comfort of the trading post's back room. Full bellies and real shelter, making them feel almost human again. Before sleep claimed him, Sam reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. One moment of conscience, one refusal to look away from suffering, had cost him his old life but given him something unexpected. Purpose, friendship, a future that felt worth waking up for. He'd been alone for so long, but he wasn't alone anymore. In the darkness, he heard Dakota's steady breathing and felt profound gratitude. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. McCready had called them a partnership. Sam thought it was more than that. They'd become something rarer and more valuable on this harsh frontier. They'd become friends. 6 weeks into their new work for McCready, Sam and Dakota had settled into a life neither had imagined possible. The supply routes took them through some of the most remote and beautiful country either had seen, vast stretches of high desert, pine-covered mountains, and hidden valleys where time seemed to move differently. They transported goods to mining camps, where grizzled prospectors paid in gold dust, to isolated ranches where families survived on sheer determination, and to small settlements that existed outside official maps and territorial jurisdiction. It was hard work, physically demanding and sometimes dangerous, but it was honest and it was theirs. The partnership between them had deepened into something unbreakable. They'd learned each other's rhythms and habits, could communicate with glances and small gestures, worked together with the efficiency of men who trusted each other completely. Sam had picked up more Apache words, and Dakota's English had improved dramatically. They talked during long rides, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their observations about the strange world they inhabited. Sam learned about Apache traditions, ways of reading the land and sky that made perfect sense once explained. Dakota learned about Sam's love of reading, the books he'd treasured as a boy, his fascination with how things worked. True to his word, McCready had facilitated contact with Dakota's family. A month into their work, they'd met with Dakota's uncle at a prearranged location. The reunion had been emotional, tears mixed with relief and joy. Dakota's family had mourned him as dead, and his reappearance felt like a miracle. His uncle had embraced Sam with genuine warmth, understanding immediately what the cowboy had risked to save Dakota's life. They'd shared a meal, and through Dakota's translation, Sam had been welcomed as family. The uncle had spoken words that Sam still carried with him. "You gave us back our son when you had everything to lose. You are our brother now." The encounter had changed something in both Sam and Dakota. They weren't just partners anymore, or even friends. They were chosen family, bound not by blood but by actions and loyalty. Dakota had made arrangements to visit his mother and sister during their next circuit in 3 months. In the meantime, they continued their work, and Sam found himself happier than he'd been in years. The fear of being caught had faded as they moved through territories where nobody cared about old warrants. They were building something new, a life defined not by what they'd left behind, but by what they were creating together. One evening, as they made camp near a high mountain lake, Dakota asked Sam a question that had clearly been on his mind. "You ever sorry for choosing to help me?" Sam looked up from the fire he was building, surprised. "Not once," he said firmly. "You?" Dakota smiled. "Sorry you got in trouble. Not sorry you helped. Not sorry we're here." He gestured at the lake reflecting the sunset, at the peaceful camp they'd made, at the life they'd built. "Before I was just surviving. Now I'm living. You gave me that." Sam felt emotion tighten his throat. "You gave me the same thing. I was just drifting before. Now I've got purpose, got a partner I'd trust with my life." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing overhead. McCready had mentioned the possibility of eventually buying into the trading post operation, becoming partners in the business rather than just hired workers. With their knowledge of the territory and established relationships with the remote communities, they were becoming invaluable. Sam could see a future taking shape, one where they'd have real stability, maybe even prosperity. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he was working for the Carson Ranch, alone and going through motions. It was better. It was real. The next morning brought an unexpected challenge. As they approached one of the mining camps on their route, they found unusual activity. Men were gathered in tense groups, voices raised in argument. Sam and Dakota exchanged glances and approached carefully. The camp foreman, a practical man named Hollis who'd always treated them fairly, came to meet them looking worried. "Glad you're here. We've got a situation." A dispute had broken out between 2 factions of miners over claim boundaries. Tempers were high and violence seemed likely. Hollis looked at Sam and Dakota. "You two have a reputation for being fair and level-headed. Would you help mediate before someone gets hurt?" Sam was surprised by the request. He was just a supply runner, not a judge or lawman. But looking at the gathered miners, some of whom he'd gotten to know over weeks of deliveries, he understood why Hollis was asking. He and Dakota were outsiders, with no stake in the dispute and no reason to favor either side. They'd earned trust through consistent fairness and reliability. Dakota nodded at Sam, willing to follow his lead. Sam agreed, and they spent the next several hours listening to both sides of the argument, examining the disputed area, and working with Hollis to propose a compromise that gave each group something while preventing violence. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. The miners grudgingly accepted the proposed solution, and the camp settled back into productive work. Afterward, Hollis pulled Sam aside. "You've got a gift for that, for seeing what's fair and making people listen. This territory needs more men like you and your partner, men who see people as people, not just sides in a fight." His words stayed with Sam as they continued their journey. He'd never thought of himself as a leader or mediator. He was just a cowboy who'd made one choice to help someone. But maybe that choice had revealed something about who he really was, something that had been buried under years of drifting and surviving. That night, as they camped under a brilliant display of stars, Sam shared Hollis's comments with Dakota. The young Apache listened thoughtfully, then offered his own perspective. "In my culture, we have a saying, the warrior who prevents battle is greater than the warrior who wins battle. You are that kind of warrior." Sam appreciated the sentiment but still felt uncertain. "I'm no warrior. I'm just trying to do right," Dakota smiled. "That's what makes you warrior, choosing right when it's hard." They talked late into the night about what it meant to be a good man, about how to build a life worth living, about the future they were creating together. 3 months into their work. As they prepared for the circuit that would bring them near Dakota's family again, Sam realized how completely his life had transformed. He'd gone from solitary drifter to essential partner in a growing enterprise. He'd gone from anonymous cowboy to trusted mediator in remote communities. Most importantly, he'd gone from alone to having family, both the friend beside him and the Apache family that had adopted him as one of their own. The price had been high, his old life entirely forfeit, but what he'd gained was worth infinitely more. As they rode toward the meeting point where Dakota's mother and sister would be waiting, Sam felt a profound sense of peace. He'd found what he'd been searching for without knowing he was searching. He'd found home, not in a place but in purpose and partnership. He'd found belonging with people who valued him for who he was and what he stood for. And it had all started with one moment in the desert, one choice to see another human being in pain and refuse to look away. That choice had seemed like an ending at the time, the destruction of everything he'd built. But it had actually been a beginning, the first day of a life that actually mattered. The reunion between Dakota and his family was everything Sam had hoped it would be. They met in a sheltered canyon, where spring water flowed year-round and cottonwood trees provided shade from the relentless sun. Dakota's mother, a woman named Kimimela whose name meant butterfly, embraced her son with tears streaming down her weathered face. His sister, barely 14 and called Ayasha, clung to her brother as if afraid he might disappear again. Dakota's uncle was there too, along with several other family members who'd made the journey to see the young man return from the dead. Sam hung back initially, unsure of his place in this intimate family gathering. But Kimimela approached him directly, taking both his hands in hers. Through Dakota's translation, she spoke words that made Sam's eyes burn with unexpected emotion. "You are the man who gave me back my son. There are no words in any language sufficient to thank you. You are welcome at our fire always. You are family now, not just to Dakota but to all of us." She placed a beaded necklace around Sam's neck, a piece she'd made herself with intricate patterns that Dakota later explained represented protection and brotherhood. Sam accepted it with profound humility, understanding he was receiving a gift more valuable than gold. The day was spent in celebration and storytelling. Sam listened as Dakota recounted their journey, his family hanging on every word. They heard about the moment Sam cut the ropes, about the long flight through dangerous country, about McCready's trading post, and the new life they'd built together. Dakota spoke with pride about Sam's fairness, his courage, his willingness to see past the divisions that separated people. In turn, Sam learned more about Dakota's life before their paths crossed. He heard stories of Dakota as a mischievous boy, always getting into trouble but with a good heart. He saw the love this family shared, the bonds that held them together through impossible hardships. Ayasha was particularly fascinated by Sam, asking him questions through her brother about life in the settlements, about books and reading, about the world beyond their traditional lands. Sam found himself charmed by her curiosity and intelligence. He promised to bring her books on their next visit, stories she could learn from and enjoy. The idea clearly delighted her, and Kimimela smiled her approval. The uncle pulled Sam aside at one point and spoke seriously through Dakota's translation. "The world is changing. Our old ways are under attack from all sides. But men like you who see beyond the surface to the human underneath, you give me hope. You and my nephew are building a bridge between worlds. That matters." As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and purple, the family shared a meal together. Sam sat in the circle, no longer feeling like an outsider but truly one of them. They laughed together, shared food from common bowls, and experienced the simple pleasure of community. It struck Sam forcefully that this was what he'd been missing his entire life. Not just friendship or partnership, but belonging. A sense of being woven into something larger than himself, connected to others by bonds of genuine care and mutual respect. He'd found family in the most unexpected place, through the most unlikely circumstances. Before they departed, Dakota's mother gave them supplies for their journey, dried meat and traveling bread, as well as herbs she'd gathered for medicine. She embraced Sam again, speaking words in Apache that Dakota translated with visible emotion. "She says you saved more than one life when you freed me. You saved our whole family from grief that would have destroyed us." She says you are proof that the Creator works through unexpected people in unexpected ways. She prays for your safety and happiness. Sam could barely respond, so moved was he by her words. He managed to thank her and promised they'd return in a few months. The ride back to McCready's trading post was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Both men were processing the depth of emotion from the reunion. Finally, Dakota spoke. My mother is right. You saved more than my life. You saved my family's spirit, and you saved me from becoming someone bitter and hard. When I was tied to that stake, I felt hate growing in my heart. Hate for all white people, for the world that seemed so cruel. But then you came. You showed me that people are individuals, that kindness exists even in unexpected places. You changed how I see the world. Sam considered this. You changed me too. I was just going through the motions before, not really living, not connected to anything or anyone. You gave me purpose, partnership, family. You taught me things about the land and about life that I never would have learned otherwise. We saved each other, Dakota. That's the truth of it. They rode on in companionable silence, both understanding that their bond had been witnessed and blessed by Dakota's family. They weren't just partners in work anymore. They were brothers in every way that mattered. Over the following months, their life continued to evolve and deepen. McCready made good on his offer, bringing them in as junior partners in the trading operation. They expanded the supply routes, established new relationships with remote communities, and became known throughout the territory as men who could be trusted absolutely. Their reputation grew not through self-promotion, but through consistent fairness and reliability. Mining camps specifically requested them for deliveries. Ranch families welcomed them warmly. Even communities that might have been hostile to an Apache or suspicious of a wanted cowboy treated them with respect because they'd earned it through their actions. Sam discovered talents he'd never known he possessed. He was good with numbers and organization, helping McCready track inventory and plan routes efficiently. He was good at reading people and situations, often diffusing tensions before they escalated into violence. Most importantly, he was good at seeing potential in others, at recognizing when someone needed a chance the way he'd needed one. They began hiring other men who were running from something, offering the same opportunity McCready had given them. Not everyone worked out, but some did, and the operation grew into something resembling a small community of people who'd been given second chances. Dakota brought his own strengths to their growing enterprise. His knowledge of the terrain was unmatched, and he taught the new workers how to read signs, find water, and move safely through dangerous country. He negotiated with Apache bands they encountered, establishing peaceful relationships that benefited everyone. His calm wisdom often balanced Sam's occasional impulsiveness. Together, they made decisions about the business, about who to hire, about which new routes to explore. They operated as true equals, each respecting what the other brought to the partnership. 2 years after Sam had cut those ropes in the Texas desert, they gathered again with Dakota's family for a celebration. This time, the occasion was Ayasha's marriage to a young warrior from a neighboring band. The ceremony was beautiful, blending tradition with hope for the future. Sam was honored to be included, sitting among family members and participating in the rituals as much as his outsider status allowed. During the celebration, Dakota's uncle spoke to the assembled group about the importance of bridges between peoples, of seeing shared humanity rather than differences. He gestured to Sam and Dakota as examples of what could be built when people chose courage and compassion over fear and division. Later, as Sam and Dakota sat apart from the main gathering, looking at stars in the clear desert sky, Dakota spoke thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about that day? The day you freed me?" Sam nodded. "All the time. It was the day my real life started." Dakota smiled. "Mine too. I was so angry when those bounty hunters caught me. Angry at the injustice, angry at the world. I thought I might die there, and part of me had almost accepted it. Then you appeared. At first, I couldn't understand why a white man would help me. It made no sense based on everything I'd been taught to expect." Sam looked at his friend, his brother. "I can't really explain why I did it. Something just clicked when I saw you tied there. I realized that all the arguments people made about who deserved help and who didn't were just excuses to avoid being decent. You were a person suffering, and I could help or I could walk away. Walking away would have been easier, safer, smarter by most calculations. But it would have killed something in me. I'd have lost a piece of my soul I'd never get back. Dakota nodded, understanding. That's what courage is. Not absence of fear, but choosing right despite the fear. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the celebration continuing behind them, the sound of drums and singing carrying on the night air. Finally, Sam spoke again. You know what's strange? I thought I was giving up everything when I freed you. My job, my safety, my future. But I actually gained everything that matters. I gained you, your family, meaningful work, a sense of purpose. I gained a life worth living instead of just surviving. If I could go back and make that choice again, knowing everything that would follow, I'd do it in a heartbeat. I'd make the same choice every single time. Dakota met his eyes in the starlight, as would I. I'd choose to trust you, to stay with you, to build this life together. We found each other in the worst moment, and we created something beautiful from it. That's rare. That's precious. He paused, then continued with unusual formality. In my culture, we have a ceremony for men who become brothers not by birth but by choice. Would you consent to this ceremony? To make official what is already true in our hearts? Sam felt emotion swell in his chest. He'd had no family for so long, and now he was being offered formal recognition as brother to a man he respected more than anyone he'd ever known. I would be honored, he managed to say. The ceremony took place the next morning at dawn with Dakota's family as witnesses. It involved ritual words in Apache that Sam didn't fully understand but felt in his soul, a sharing of water and food, and an exchange of gifts that symbolized their permanent bond. When it was complete, Dakota's mother blessed them both, and Sam officially became part of the family in the eyes of their community. As they prepared to depart later that day, heading back to the trading post and their work, Sam wore the ceremonial markings of brotherhood with fierce pride. He was no longer a drifter without connections. He was Samuel Garrett, brother to Dakota, son to Kimimela, member of a family that had accepted him completely. 5 years after Sam freed Dakota in that Texas desert, the trading post had transformed into something neither man could have imagined. What started as McCready's rough outpost had grown into a thriving hub for the territory, a place where people from different backgrounds conducted business without the prejudices that plagued official settlements. When McCready passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years prior, he'd left the entire operation to Sam and Dakota equally, recognizing that they'd built it into something far beyond what he'd achieved alone. The old trader's last words to them had been simple but profound. You boys proved something important. Proved that doing right matters more than playing safe. Keep proving it after I'm gone. They'd honored that trust by expanding their vision beyond simple trading. The post now housed a small school where Dakota's sister Ayasha taught children from various communities, both Apache and settler, side by side. The idea had been controversial at first, but the practicality of education overcame most objections. Children learned reading, writing, mathematics, and practical skills that served them regardless of their background. Sam taught some of the classes, sharing his love of books and learning, watching children from different worlds playing together during breaks. He often thought about how much simpler life would be if adults could maintain that childhood ability to see people rather than categories. The trading post employed over a dozen workers now, a mixture of backgrounds and stories. There was Marcus, a freed man from Louisiana who'd fled west after threats to his life, who proved to be a genius with horses and now managed their growing stable. There was Elena, a widow from Mexico who'd lost her husband to violence and found refuge in their community, who ran the kitchens and somehow managed to feed everyone delicious meals despite limited resources. There was old Tom, a former prospector who'd struck no gold, but had a gift for repairing anything mechanical, keeping their wagons and tools in perfect condition. Each person had a story, often painful, but here they'd found acceptance and purpose. Sam and Dakota had built personal lives too, though in different ways. Dakota had married a woman named Winona, from a band that traded regularly at the post. She was strong-willed and intelligent, unimpressed by Dakota's reputation but charmed by his kindness. They now had 2 children, a daughter named Kimmy after Dakota's mother, and a son called Samuel in honor of the bond between the 2 men. Sam had never married, though not for lack of opportunity. He'd had offers and interest from several women over the years, but somehow he'd never felt the same pull toward marriage that others did. His life felt complete with his work, his extended family, and the community they'd built. He'd grown close to Elena, though, in a way that surprised them both. She was 15 years his senior, with grey threading through her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes that deepened when she smiled. Their relationship defied easy categorization. Not quite romantic, not exactly platonic, but something deeper and more comfortable than either. They spent evenings talking about books, about life, about dreams and regrets. She understood his restless past and accepted his present without trying to change either. When people asked if they'd marry, Eleanor would laugh and say they were already family, which was more important than any paper or ceremony could make them. The territory around them continued to change. The harsh justice of the early frontier was slowly, very slowly, giving way to more structured law. Railroads were pushing into regions that had been isolated, bringing both opportunity and complication. Sam and Dakota had to navigate these changes carefully, maintaining their reputation for fairness while adapting to new realities. Some of their old customers disappeared as settlements grew closer. Others stayed loyal, preferring the personal relationships and trust they'd built over years. The post remained a neutral ground, a place where people could trade and talk without the tensions that infected more official locations. One afternoon, a marshal arrived at the post, the first law enforcement officer to visit in over a year. Sam felt old fears resurface as the man dismounted and approached. The marshal was young, maybe 30, with intelligent eyes and a professional demeanor. He introduced himself as Marshal William Carson and asked to speak with the owners. Sam and Dakota met with him in the post's main room, both wary but projecting calm confidence. Carson looked between them for a long moment before speaking. "I've heard interesting stories about this place and about you two, about how you run things, about the community you've built. I'm here to understand what I'm dealing with." Sam exchanged glances with Dakota, then decided on honesty. "We run an honest operation. We trade fairly, we don't cheat anyone, and we don't turn away people who need help. If that's a problem, we'd like to know why." Carson pulled out a folded paper from his coat, and Sam's stomach dropped, expecting a warrant. Instead, the marshal unfolded a letter. "This is from a judge I respect talking about you two. Apparently, several mining camps and ranches in this territory submitted testimonials about your character when they heard a new marshal was being assigned here. They wanted me to know that you're assets to this region, not problems." The relief Sam felt was physical. Carson continued, "I've also seen old warrants. There's one for you, Mr. Garrett, from Texas, 5 years old, regarding freeing an Apache prisoner." He looked at Dakota. "I assume you're that prisoner." Dakota nodded calmly. Carson folded the paper back up. "Here's what I know. That warrant was issued by territorial authorities who no longer have jurisdiction here. The men who filed it are either dead, gone, or don't care anymore. More importantly, enforcing that warrant would upset a lot of people who've made it clear they value what you've built here. So officially, I haven't seen any wanted men. I've just met 2 businessmen running a legitimate operation." Sam couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Carson stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to legitimate society, gentlemen. Try to keep it peaceful around here and we'll get along fine." He shook both their hands and departed, leaving Sam and Dakota staring at each other in shock. After 5 years of looking over their shoulders, of wondering if the past would catch up, they were suddenly free. Truly free. Not hiding or running or hoping to stay overlooked, but actually clear. Dakota started laughing first, and Sam joined him, the tension of years releasing in waves of relieved laughter. That evening, they gathered everyone at the post for a celebration. Sam stood before the assembled group, this unlikely family they'd built from broken pieces and second chances, and spoke from his heart. "5 years ago, I was a drifter, with no purpose and no connections. I made one choice, one decision to help someone when I could have walked away, and that choice changed everything. It brought me to Dakota's friendship, this community, a life worth living. Each of you has your own story of how you got here, but we all share something important. We all chose to keep trying, to keep believing in something better, even when the world seemed determined to break us." He looked at Dakota, his brother in all but blood. "This place exists because someone showed me that second chances matter, that people can change their path, that doing right is more important than playing safe. We've built something rare here, a place where your past doesn't define you, where you're judged by who you are now and who you're trying to become. Let's keep building it." Let's keep proving that there's another way to live beyond the harsh judgments and divisions that make people so hard on each other. The group erupted in agreement, and the celebration continued into the night with music, food, and the warmth of genuine community. Later, long after most had gone to sleep, Sam sat outside looking at the stars. Dakota joined him, carrying 2 cups of Elena's strong coffee. They sat in the comfortable silence of old friends who didn't always need words. Finally, Dakota spoke. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd made a different choice that day? If you'd just ridden past?" Sam considered this. "Sometimes. But I don't think I really could have. Something in me knew that walking past would have been a kind of death. I'd have survived physically, but I'd have lost something essential. My humanity, maybe. My sense of who I wanted to be.